Our program today is one of a series of 3 that we have been doing these past couple of weeks, centered around the book, All That She Carried, which is the book that I have out on the table. This is a book that was written by Dr. Taya Miles. She's a professor of history at Harvard University and the author of multiple prize-winning works in the history of early American race relations. Her book, All That She Carried, is a National Book Award winner. Indiana Humanities One State, One Story program invites Hoosiers to engage deeply with the book as part of a statewide conversation tied to our current theme. Nonprofits like our historic site can receive grant funding to host programming centered around the book chosen. And for 2004, Indiana Humanities wished to center on this particular book, which highlights a story that encourages us to look at objects and learn more about our past and how those histories form who we are today. Our program series looks to examine this theme, and this is the 3rd of 3 programs that we hosted. So we're grateful to Indiana Humanities for providing the funding so we could do this. So we did a book discussion, we had a family history workshop, and so we're wrapping up today with our presentation. So today it's no surprise to me to see many interested in learning the story of William Bush, who was a Fountain City resident who escaped slavery and chose to make his life of freedom here in our town. Like in Dr. Miles's book, which examines a family object and oral history which passed through generations and have since found their home at historic institutions. In Miles's book, which centers on the story of an enslaved mother named Rose, whose 9-year-old daughter Ashley was sold. Before Ashley was taken, Rose provided her with a sack containing a handful of items. That sack survived Ashley's years as a slave and was handed down to her daughter, Ruth, who at some point embroidered the family history of Rose, Ashley, and those objects onto the sack itself. In the book, Miles dives into many directions of what this gift from a mother and daughter meant. The story that we are going to examine today, the story of William Bush, also involves a family whose oral history, along with several objects, have helped to keep the memory of William alive. Today, we're going to hear from his great-great-granddaughter, Eileen Baker-Wall, who will speak to his family's history and William's story. And afterwards, I'm going to speak to the work being done to further examine how using that oral history of Bush's life helps us to create a clearer understanding of specific dates and events of William's escapes and experiences. Eileen Baker-Wall is a Fountain City native and today lives in Richmond. She's a retired school teacher and administrator with Richmond Community Schools and has been a very active presence in Wayne County organizations. This includes her longtime commitment to the Levi and Catharine Coffin State Historic Site, as well as serving as not just a tour guide here, but a board member of the Levi Coffin House.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and wow, is it great to see all of you. I'm just thrilled that you would come and see and look and hear and participate, ask questions, we can discuss, and I hope that you will go away learning something that you may not have known before, and I'm very sure that I will. In fact, I have already as I walk in the door. There's always something else to learn, and I'm just praying that I can remember most of it. Well, today we're talking about, or I'm talking about, how William Bush's life and Ashley, the daughter of Rose's life in the book, All She Carried, are the comparisons that we might have. And actually, I find quite a bit of divergence in the way they got to where each of them were in a period of time that encompassed slavery, being in slavery, being freed from slavery, and having all of the things that she carried and the things that he carried. So that's what I'm about to do, is to talk a little bit about Wimbush, and I'll talk about a little bit about Ashley, and I'll just show you how their lives come together, or maybe not. Wimbush was born in North Carolina. Ashley was found in South Carolina. So there, right there, we have two different ways of life that emerged from these two people. Now, Wimbush would have been about 49, somewhere between 49 and 53, when Ashley was found on a plantation in South Carolina. He had family. We're not sure who his ancestors were. I know who his descendants are, but not much about his ancestors. He was mulatto. I know that he was a man of multiple races, and he was bred, or he was kin. He was the family ties that I have with him, I'm very sure of. The family ties that went on before his coming out of slavery and coming to Indiana are mysterious. I wish I had his picture. I wish I knew who his parents were. But because of slavery, the names have changed. And so I'm living with, well, I wonder who. Was he a McKissick in slavery, or was he Mackenzie? We think we found the lead for that. And so certainly that working with those two names and going back in history, I'm still trying to find definition or facts that will tell me that what I think is true. Much of what I know was given to me by my great aunt, who lived all of her life right here in Fountain City. Her name was Ina Burden. And for years and years and years, some of my family didn't even know that she was our kin. And I was curious about that, because that meant to me that our family had not learned much about each other. Some of them that lived within 40 miles or so of one another didn't really know who we were. I didn't really know who we were until about 6th grade. And then I began asking questions, because I had teachers who were saying, "Do you know who you are?" "Well, yeah, I'm Eileen Bragg." "Well, do you know who came before you? Do you know about your heritage?" "No, I just know that my dad and mom told me my name is Eileen Bragg, and that's about it, okay?" So then when I began to ask questions, when teachers began to ask me, I began to ask my parents. And I was surprised that my parents were a little bit reluctant to talk about our family history. I couldn't figure that out for several years until I started delving into slavery, learning about slavery. Probably in my freshman, sophomore, junior years of school, I learned more about what slavery was and how it affected real people. It wasn't just a story. It was my life story too. Now, Ashley was documented to be on an estate of a Robert Martin in South Carolina. At 9 years old, she was separated from her family, from her mother Rose. There were probably some biological ties, but we don't know whether those biological ties for Ashley were through arranged marriages or crude breeding to have more slaves, because by the time that she came along, we were no longer importing slaves from Africa, but they were being produced, so to speak, or bred right here in this country. So she didn't really know where she came from either. It could have been through the breeding or coerced sexual relations, that's what it was, or it could have been a close-knit cluster of a few people that were surrounding her, mainly her mother, and then after that, several years after that, there was a granddaughter, Ruth, who carried on that family story. Her story was carried on mainly through a sack that her mother gave her to carry as she was separated from her family, from her mother, and taken off to that plantation in it was in South Carolina. She was born in South Carolina, I believe. Her history there on the plantation started when she was about 9 years old, and that she knew that she had been separated from her family. Her mother had given her a sack to carry, and the contents of that sack was very important to her. My grandfather had the fortune to be free. His documented freedom is in the 1850 census right here in Indiana. So he came here from North Carolina and across over through and up through North Carolina on over into Tennessee and then into Kentucky and ended up here. Now, why did he end up here? Well, that's a good question. But I'm trying to piece it together that he possibly ended up here because there was by word of mouth, he knew there was a colored settlement somewhere in this area. And what I found out is that there were also AME churches, African Methodist Episcopal churches, in this area. Now, if you do any traveling around like I do, I like to do a lot, you would know that the AME Church came out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, African Methodist Episcopal, separated from the Methodist Church, what is now the United Methodist Church, that came out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The reason my people came out of that church was because they were not welcome to go to the altar and pray. They were allowed to come and stand in the back or go up into the balcony and observe the services, but they weren't members of that church. And so the AME Church was formed in Philadelphia. They began to move out into this area at an early time. The AME Church was formed here in Richmond, Indiana, and here in Fountain City in about 1836. They had circuit rider preachers that came back and forth to both communities to take care of the needs of the people. So following the AME Church, I think, is how maybe my great-great-grandfather, William Bush, got here. Well, when he came here, there are 2 or 3 stories about how he got here. One was that he was shipped in a box to Levi Coffin. Well, that made sense because we know that Levi Coffin was an abolitionist. He had become known across not only Indiana, but to other states, into Ohio, into Illinois, into Michigan. And he had traveled, and the word had spread. How had it spread? By word of mouth. That's how my people knew that there was some place for them to be, for them to go, when they were released from slavery. I have to think that perhaps William Bush had a very benevolent or a very kind master, because when he came to this place, he had money in his pocket. Now, one story said he was shipped here and sent to William Bush, and William Bush sent to Levi Coffin, excuse me. William Bush was sent to Levi Coffin. Levi Coffin opened the box. He saw this man with a bushy beard and bushy hair, and he named him William Bush. Why did Coffin do that? Well, Levi didn't want to know the correct name or the legal name of any of the slaves that came through here, because Levi Coffin was a Christian. And he said, if I know their names, then I'd have to tell a lie. So I'll rename them. And he could honestly say, have you seen Wimbush? No, I haven't seen him. I don't know who. I don't know who Wim McKissick is. That was the surname of Levi Coffin, of Wimbush in slavery. I don't want to mix them up, but I'm doing it. My great-great-grandfather was McKissick or McKenzie in slavery. So Levi Coffin renamed the slaves as they came through here. When he saw my great-great-grandfather, Wimbush, Levi Coffin thought that they could probably work together to do the job that my great-great-grandfather wanted to do. Whose idea was it? That black people wanted to be free and they wanted to get out of slavery. Well, I suppose it was their idea first. And then they had some helpers come along, and those people were called abolitionists. And you know that abolish means to get rid of something. They wanted to get rid of slavery. If Levi Coffin hadn't done what he did, and my great-great-grandfather hadn't done what he did, then there would have been some people that would have languished in slavery for longer than they did. My great-great-grandfather came here somewhere between 1840 and 1850. I know that he's in the 1850 census. I looked for him myself. I know that he's not in the 1840 census because I looked for him myself. And as I told you, when I was growing up, it took a long time for my parents and my grandparents to talk about where we came from. You know what? It's amazing to me that we, as a black people, were embarrassed that we were enslaved. And we didn't talk about it. We just left that part out. Well, I wasn't about to leave out who I am. And so, as I talked to my parents, they told me bits and pieces. I still didn't know that those shoes existed. Those are my great-great-grandfather's wooden shoes that he wore. Why did he wear those shoes? He was a blacksmith. Blacksmiths wore, sometimes carved, their own wooden shoes. They needed to wear those shoes because when they were working in the coals to make the items that they would make out of iron or whatever, they needed to cover their feet because the ashes from the coals could burn their feet. That makes sense. I don't know whether he carved them or not. I find it hard to believe, with my lack of being an artist, that he could do something that well. Certainly he didn't pass it on to me. But it's peculiar to me. I didn't know about those shoes for years and years and years. Why? Because my Aunt Ina kept them hidden. She had them. They had been in Wimbush's house, which still stands right here in town, up in the attic. She had quietly taken those shoes when they sold his place and took them to her house and put them away. As many times as I visited her in her home, I never heard about those shoes. And then one day, all of a sudden, when this house was opening, my father began to tell me about Aunt Ina gave the shoes to the Coffin. I was like, what shoes? Whose shoes? My shoes? I only had a couple of pairs, so I was hoping that wasn't true. But anyway, I find out then that I have more history than I never knew. I never knew why my father said that my brothers and sisters and I had to graduate from Fountain City School. I thought that was pretty stupid because I had this urge to be at Richmond High School. not only for the curriculum, but for the boys who were there. I had from church, when we attended church in Richmond at Bethel AME Church, which still exists, I'm still a member of, and I just wanted to get the heck out of Fountain City about as fast as I could. This was one of the most boring places to live when you were a kid. There was nothing open.
Three little boys.
Yeah, okay, all right, you know. There was nothing to do on Friday and Saturday. I looked forward to school year-round. If I could have gone to school all year, that would have been wonderful. I didn't look forward to summers. I didn't look, because there was nothing to do here. And had I known then more about why I was staying here, I would have been more enthusiastic about it, I think. But anyway, my father had said that he graduated from Fountain City High School in 1926, and all four of his kids were going to graduate from Fountain City High School too. So I spent much more time in this town than I wanted to. And had I known what was here and what I should be looking for, I probably would have been even more curious, and I probably would have been around here digging things up if I could. But that didn't happen. So anyway, Wimbush came here, lived his life here, changed his name here, came from McKissick or McKenzie to Wimbush, and found a very, very pleasant place to live. Now I'm amused and confused sometimes and exceedingly happy that he was accepted here. I'm not sure why. He had 2 wives while he was here. His first wife was Charlotte. He had about 5 or 6 children with her, still trying to find out who they were and where they went. And then he had another wife named Mary, whom I think is my biological great-grandmother, okay? Mary had probably 6 more children. And when Wimbush married his second wife, it wasn't uncommon. He was in probably his early 60s and she was 30-something. She lived in Richmond. They got together. Charlotte, the first wife, is dead. I can't find her. She's not seemingly in the cemetery down here in Fountain City. So I don't really know what happened in that marriage. I only know that by 1860, Wimbush was listed as a widower. So found him in the 1850 census. By 1860, he's a widower. By 1863, my great-grandmother, Savannah Bell Bush, was born. But if Charlotte died in 1860 that is, and he remarried in 66, and my grandmother, great-grandmother, was born in 63, do you see my dilemma here? Well, again, like I said, my parents didn't talk about slavery. They didn't talk about what was going on, and it took me many years. I knew there was a house for the Braggs. That the Braggs, my maiden name, they had 2 houses, one in town and one out of town on what became Bragg Road, and I didn't know why it became Bragg Road until I researched that and found out, oh, they lived out there at one time. During the Depression, I knew that my family lost the home, but they had a home here, lost the farm, but they had a home here in town. So piecing things together, continuing to be the curious kid that I was, I got bits and pieces of what was going on with my family. Ashley, I'm going to talk a little bit more about her. She was immersed into very laborious, very demanding slave as a slave, picking cotton. She wasn't so fortunate to stay on the coast or in Charleston, and she had to go out and work into the cotton picking community. And as cotton was becoming more and more profitable, slavery was becoming more and more the case. So she moved on out to where, away from the genteel society that was existing in Charleston in that day. You know, we see the movies and we hear the stories about what a great place Charleston was to live. Well, that was true. Even in slavery, there was more of an expectation that slaves that lived in the city would have a social acceptability. Whereas when they moved out of the city and into the countryside and became so involved in planting and harvesting cotton, then they weren't so well thought of. They didn't have the social prestige that even as a slave they might have had living within the city of Charleston. I like to go to Charleston now because I want to piece together what I know of my family and how it might have been a part of that family at some point, whether my great-great-grandfather coming out of North Carolina had any connection with the black peoples that were coming out of Charleston or out of South Carolina, how much mix there was, who else came here. It was hard enough for us to find our relatives, period, because of the name changes and all of that. And so I have a great curiosity, and sometimes I can just make up my own stories. But I'm not going to tell you any of my own stories today. I'm going to tell you the truth. Wimbush, in his life here, owned property. I knew where one of his houses was because it's still there, but I didn't know that my great-great-grandfather owned property right on Main Street, Fountain City, right in the middle of town, right where that one traffic light is. We only have one. And he owned property right there on that corner. When I grew up, that corner of Main Street that comes up through Fountain City going from east to west, and US 27 was cross Main. Those were places where later on my father told me a lot of stuff that happened right there on those corners. There used to be a post office there and grocery store there on that corner. I can remember some of it, a filling station there on that corner. So all four corners were the bustling part of Fountain City. But later on, that bustling part of it burned down I can't remember now, but I think it was the late 50s, early 60s, when I was about to graduate from high school. But anyway, my father would tell me stories about the Ku Klux Klan and how they would gather on a corner, and how my grandfather, Walter Bragg, my father's father, knew every gentleman that was standing there with his hood and his robe on and trying to be incognito, ha ha ha. He knew their voices. He knew what they were talking about. He would be standing on the corner with them. There was no secrecy about the prevalence of the Ku Klux Klan here in this town. While that was going on, Ashley was installed there at a plantation, picking cotton. That's the life she knew. Being separated from her mother, and at the age of 9, over here, as a slave, separated from all that she knew, her grandmother, her mother, and all of the people that she did not have the opportunity to know. And you know, one thing that hit me and almost made me cry as I was, I did have a tear or two, to be honest, because here is someone so deeply ingrained in her loss of freedom. And here, somehow, and I can only think it was by the grace of God, that my ancestor got to come here and be a free man at such an early time. Now, he was in his 50s when she was 9, 40s or 50, late 40s or early 50s, but he was here. He was in this community. He was able to buy property. He was able to have property on Main Street. I don't know what happened to the property. I've still got that to do. I hope that I have a few more years that I can do a little bit more research so I can find out what happened to my property. It was right there on Main Street. Well, it went away. Probably the fact that he had 11 children altogether may have had something to do with it. I would like to have been there when they divvied up whatever was left. But anyway, he was able to make a life right here in what became Fountain City in 1878. He was here. He was on the boards of some of the goings-on that were happening, whether it was the 50-year anniversary. I can't remember now what he was doing to commemorate moving from Newport to Fountain City. He was here during that time when Fountain City was changed from Newport to Fountain City in 1878. He was here. He got to be a part of all that. He got to serve on committees about celebrating Fountain City or celebrating what Newport had been when the name was changed. Do you know why we had to lose the name Newport here in Fountain City? There's another Newport across the state down by Terre Haute.
It makes research really difficult.
It does, doesn't it? But you know what's happening? The mail was getting mixed up. Newport, Indiana, one side of the state, the other side of the state, on almost the same positions in the state, I think, in central Indiana, both sides. Well, my great-great-grandfather was able to stay right here. He had some contemporaries. I don't know even the population of what we called colored people in colored settlements right here was, how big the settlement was. We have more history about settlements that were around here. Cabin Creek, where my mother's people came from, which is over by Modoc, Indiana, if you know that area. Other settlements up in Greenville, Ohio, the Longtown settlement, where there was a mixture of biracial people who settled early on. But not much known about what went on here, except that one time there must have been a sizable community of colored people because they had the church, the AME church, and they were prevalent all along what is now US 27, because I know our people, oh, by the way, that's my cousin Greg sitting over here. Our people, Greg, were stretched from here to Jay County, Portland, Indiana, where we had people live, on up to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where we had people living. And I knew about these cousins long before I saw any of them. Some of them I didn't see before they passed on. But there was a prevalence, there was a comfort in coming here. You know who else was important in this process? The Quaker people who lived here. This town had 2 Quaker churches. Now, I can't ever remember when I was a kid of this town getting any bigger than about 700 or 800 people, and 2 open, active Quaker churches, even in my time. So it tells me, and I hope I'm telling you a little bit about the atmosphere, the freedom that my people could feel to come here and to stay here for a little while anyway. I'm still having trouble finding all of Wim Bush's children, finding out where they went. I found that some of them, 1 or 2 of them, were a very light complexion people, as was Wim Bush. I don't have a picture of him, but I understand he was a fair complexioned man. He had straight hair. already told you, I think, that he was a mulatto. He was mixed race. So some of the opportunities that my people had here in this community and even in this state seemed to have come from the fact that they didn't look quite like me. They could be involved in more things than I even could when I was growing up here with a kid. That's another story. My fair complexioned relatives had more opportunities than we who were not so fair. And that went on, and for years, even as I was growing up, as I became an adult, I just watched what was happening to people. So I think that may be why Wimbush was accepted into society here. He built his home. He obviously had a good amount of wealth to be able to build a home or have a home built, and to have it still standing at this time, that's pretty miraculous. The one that I lived in isn't still standing. It burned, but that's another story, long after we had left here. Anyway, Wim had some contemporaries here, and this is one of them that I don't know much about, but I came home from a trip the other day, and this was lying on my dining room table.
Do you know who left it there?
Yeah, my girlfriend back there. Because she probably didn't know what to do with it, so she said, I'll take it to Eileen. Anyway, this is a picture of Wade Curry. Now I've seen that picture several times, even in textbooks. Wade Curry, who lived here. He was a contemporary of Wimbush. That's all I know about him.
Okay.
I don't know his family. I don't know who they were. Marlene, talk a little bit about what you learned about Wade Curry today. She's been researching even as I was working on what I was doing this morning. She's very bashful. Open your big mouth. She's learned to have a big mouth.
What does the star mean on his coat?
Pardon me?
The star on his coat.
That's a good question.
I
don't know.
This was loaned to me by a classmate of mine, David Corsi, and his great-grandfather, the name on the back is
Robert Morris Clark?
Robert Morris Clark lived here, and turn it around.
Should have gloves on. But
Yeah, well.
So he wasn't sure, but that was, he got it. And again, Wade Curry was, he did live with William Bush for a couple of years when he became feeble. And so he went to live with them until he went to the infirmary. And he lived to be about 102 years old. So David was, interested because it was his great-grandfather's to see if that was a print or if it was real or what was about it. So, but again, it's kind of like one of those, like the sack, the shoes, and a drawn picture of him is really pretty special.
yeah. We do have a, sorry.
Did most of the men wear those clogs?
That's another thing I don't know.
Because he's
I have,
got on.
yes. And
He's got boots.
I have examined that.
Clogs?
No, those are boots.
Boots.
But what does the star mean? Do you know?
I have no idea. I looked at the picture. I examined this picture. It's the first time I've had an opportunity just to stand there and look at it and look at this and look at that. And I've wondered too what that star means. I don't know if it could have something to do with belonging to Masonic lodge or I'm just guessing. I'm throwing out, and maybe somewhere in lodge records at
Well,
some
I
point.
thought deputy maybe, but
You thought what?
deputy.
Yeah, I thought that too, but I've never heard that he was ever a deputy. Could be, because out here, and you know, even when I was growing up, we kind of had our own law out here. Well, we're far away from the sheriff who's in Richmond. Yeah, you have one cop now, right? We didn't even have that when I was growing up. So, very well, you know, I don't know, maybe some.
Wade seems to be a subject of a lot of local artists.
Yeah.
My understanding, what are the name of the sisters that did the pottery? It's
Overbeck.
The Overbecks.
Overbecks.
put the piece, of Wade's image. And I think that there was I've seen a different drawing, and I don't know if it was by the same person, but anyway, he seems to be a subject that fascinates local artists, but we don't have a lot of stories of
No.
him. So.
No, we don't. So I'm excited about the fact that David Corsi, who Marlene knows a little bit more about than I do, will be back in town as soon as the weather gets better, in the spring probably. And so I've got some questions to ask him. And I'm just glad to know that he has come across something like that, and he has been so kind to try to find a place for it. The place for it is not in my home, because my son, when I'm gone, he will come in and he will clear it out. And so I try to tell him what's important, what may be on the walls or what may be in the drawers or whatever. It's important, but I'm going to see if we can't find a place for this picture, because I don't want it to be just lost, just to be tossed. This was what was so important about Ashley having this bag that her mother prepared for her, the sack that she carried from as she went off to be a slave, to be enslaved, a dress, some pecans, 3 hands full, I understand, and a braid of her mother's hair. I thought about it when I read about the braid of her mother's hair. I'm thinking, you know, at 12 years old or something, I wore braids for all my life up until 12 years old, and I was sick of those. And finally, I didn't have to cut them off myself. Carol knows that we had some kids that just cut their own hair, didn't they? And when they got tired of wearing braids, they just cut it off. But I didn't do that. I had my hair cut off, and somewhere there were some braids that I had. I think about all of the things that I don't have anymore, and I have no idea what happened to them. Like my class sweater. Our class was proud of our sweaters. Class of 61, Fountain City High School. The colors were charcoal and gray. Boring. I guess I helped choose those colors. I'm sure I had something to do with it. But anyway, things that happen, things in your life. It may not be something tangible like the shoes that we have here with the hole that's in them that I know my great-great-grandfather wore. It might be something smaller than that. It might be a sack of stuff that somebody gave you. And what are you doing with that piece of your heritage? How do people know who you are? Now, all of us aren't going to be famous, for sure, but you know, our sacks might be important in knowing who we are, who we were, who we are, and who we may be in the future. And so I'm pleased that I've learned about this book at this time, because now I want to know more, just like you were talking about, what kind of clothing did he have on, and why did he have on that star? Why didn't anybody take a picture of my great-great-grandfather? He was a prominent man right here in this community, and there's not one picture that I have found. Now the problem is, if I found the picture, how would I really know it was him? Yeah. So, when I was growing up, I did one thing that I think made really good sense. My mother had all of these pictures, and I sat down with her one day and I said, I want you to name who are these people. And on the back of the picture, I want to put their name on there, and do you remember anything about what era or what year this picture might have been taken? Well, let's put that on there too. Do you have any information about who that person may have been? Let's put that on there. He may have been my cousin or he, whatever. Let's put it on the picture. On my mother's side of the family, there's a 5-generation picture. It's amazing. That's really cool. My sister got to be in it. I was not first. I was the middle child. I'm still having problems with that.
Middle children are the best ones. They are, though.
Thank you.
I have 3.
You have 3. Okay. Okay. That's good news. But I find that we need to preserve, we need to know, we need to have an interest in it. How many of our young people today some of them don't even know who their grandma is, you know, or their aunts and their uncles. I always wanted to know who my people were, even though some of them I didn't really care to be around much. I wanted to know who they were. It was important to me. So I'm saying to you that whatever sack you've been given, just like Ashley, she carried her sack, that sack that her mother gave her, with a dress in it, with some pecans in it, and with a hair braid. What did that say to her when she was separated from her people? She was enslaved. She never got out of it, but she had to have something to hold on to. So what are we holding on to? I'm holding on to the fact that these shoes are here. They're here for people to see. They're here for people to learn about my heritage if they're interested, or just who was this man and what did he do here and why did he stay here? That's amazing to me, because you know most people that came through here were zooming right on up through Indiana into Michigan and over into Windsor, Canada. Get the heck out of here. You want to be free? Go to Canada. Well, anyway, why he chose to stay, and the fact that my father was sensitive enough to know this was a special place for our people. For years, there was a basket meeting held here in this town of colored people coming back together from wherever to have a basket meeting. Modoc, Indiana, Cabin Creek Settlement. There were colored people coming back together for years and years and years to talk about who they were. Finally, when we got past thinking that there was something wrong with us because we were in slavery, it was like, it was our embarrassment. Oh no, it's not my embarrassment. It's what it was. And it's something that if we don't tell what baggage or what sack we carry and what's in that sack, then history could be repeated.
Did you tell what was in this? Did you say what was in the sack?
Her sack had a dress. Her mother sent her with a dress.
The interesting thing, I just finished a novel called The Book of Forgotten Friends.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read it. It's about kids in slavery that had been separated from their parents, but they carried in a sack a book. And when they'd stop someplace, they'd ask somebody, "Are you missing somebody?" And then they would place an ad in the paper, "This person is looking," and the minister would read it on Sunday. But they carried this book of these forgotten friends.
Wow. I haven't read that, but I want to write down the title.
I'll send you a message.
Oh, you can sit. That's a good way. Yeah. Okay. I'll be looking forward to it because I want to read that book. I want to know the stories that people have handed down, or the things that we just kind of toss things out sometimes and don't think they're important.
I just read a book and I can't think of the name of it, but it was fascinating history, and I didn't even realize where they went from Indiana. Nobody ever had mentioned that to me. I knew they went somewhere. And then I
The
read
slaves, you mean, the freed slaves?
Then I read about the people in Canada who taught them and made life much richer while they were there. I
understand that there are a couple of settlements, and I haven't gotten there yet. I've got to make it my business to get there soon. But there's still a couple of settlements that came out of this particular area that went over into Canada. I can't even tell you the names now, but there are a couple of small towns just over the border that are still active. Yes, yes, yes. So who knows what relatives I might have up there somewhere, or what connections we might have. But it just shows you that here was a Mother Rose, who thought enough to give her daughter Ashley this sack to carry with a dress. Now the dress may have been tattered, it may not have been in great shape, but it was her dress. And by the way, I'm learning now from reading this book more about and thinking more about what did slaves wear? What kind of clothing did they have access to? And this has been a great help to me to just start thinking about, well, when somebody said, did my grandfather look like Wade Curry? I have no idea. But now I'm beginning to think, well, I want to piece together more about what life was like, even if I can't put it together with what his life was particularly like. I do know that he came here, he stayed here, he's buried here. And I know that in about 1960 or so, there was one of my cousins who came back to this town, who put a marker on his grave, who did not contact my father or in any way, shape, or form try to find out what family was still here. My father lived in this community. Greg's grandfather lived in Muncie, Indiana. Other relatives lived in Richmond. She came back here, had the stone put on his grave, stayed with one of the women who were active in the Levi Coffin Association, and left town. And the next thing we knew, there's an article in the paper, and Dorothy Hilliard had put a stone on my great-great-grandfather's grave and didn't even bother to tell me or to tell my dad, and he was livid. Anyway, how connections are lost or how connections are kept depends on what we do with our heritage. And so this book has truly made me know all that she carried were those 3 items. But how important was it that Ashley carried her sack right on into slavery? Well, like I said, her life was not that great. She was not in a place of social acceptability. She wore whatever Negro cloth was. And did you know there was a particular cloth set aside for slaves to wear? Why? They could be identified by the clothing that they were wearing. First time I'd ever heard of Negro cloth. First time I'd ever heard how it was produced and it was expected that the slave would wear. First time that I ever thought about how much clothing did a slave have. And I should have, because I have closets full. But 1 or 2 outfits per year. Living in a climate like the climate we have here. Now that might have been okay in the deep South, where you only needed a vest-like top and maybe some pants, and women had long dresses, and maybe they had long sleeves in them, maybe not. So you better be in a climate where you were warmer most of the year, or you might been a slave who was freezing most of the time, because the clothing was not that comforting or covering your body. You might had to go with tattered things for many, many years. So my appreciation for my grandfather and his plight, coming here, being involved in the community, perhaps being a part of the AME Church, which, by the way, go back and tell your churches, if you have one, keep good records, write names down, talk about who joined and when they joined, the year, and all of those things, because those are records that we go seeking when sometimes there's no place else to go.
Absolutely.
So there's a need for that kind of thing. My great-great-grandfather had wealth. Like I said, he had cash, he had property. It's been dispersed. I don't know what happened to it. And that's another thing. You can spend hours and hours and days and months and years in records. Some of ours in Wayne County, I found out 2 or 3 years ago when I was going to look for some records in the clerk's office, and I said I wanted to find property records for William Bush. What happened to the property? Well, you know, those books are down in the basement, and we're going to get them up here someday, and when we do, you're welcome to come look at them. But right now, they're buried down in the basement, and I really don't want to go down there and get them. Well, thank you very much. I want to know that before I die. And so I think maybe time has passed. I'm going to go back again, hopefully, not before this year's out, but maybe next year, 2025 would be a good year to do that, and go back and find those kinds of things. Well, that's about the end of my story. In the census of 1870, William Bush had married Mary Bush. He was 61, she was 33. They had all of these children, out of which my great-grandmother came, Savannah Bell Bush. Savannah Bell Bush still lived in this community all of her life. She's buried down there in Willow Grove Cemetery. I have found that one interesting thing about the cemetery down here, Willow Grove Cemetery, that people were all buried together at one time, no matter what color they were. It didn't matter. And so when you go into the cemetery, my great-great-grandfather's grave is right across the bridge. There's a park in front of the cemetery. You go across the bridge, his grave is sitting almost up on a little hill. And the people around him are not black people. They were all buried together. You know when they stopped being buried together? After the Civil War. All of a sudden, we had segregation and racism galore. That tells me something else about the stamina of my people to endure what they endured and to finally be invited into the human race, to be a part of humanity. Ashley didn't have such a joy as my grandfather had. But because he had the joy of being freed, however he came to be free at an early age, lived to be either somewhere between 88 and 92. Some records say he was born in 1800, some say 1804. But he lived to be an old man, and he's buried right here. And because of that, my sack is pretty full. I can talk about what happened to my people. I can say it's not my fault, and it's not my people's fault that slavery existed. But I can also tell you that if we as a people, a united people, care about one another, there won't be any more of the thing that black people had to experience. It was a horrible thing. And I tell everybody almost every time I get an opportunity, don't romanticize slavery. It was not romantic. It was horrible.
Amen.
It was horrible.
On that subject, I have a question. I'm concerned about book banning. And I understand in Texas, the state school board, like Indiana, approves certain history books. They must be used. One of the books
Yes.
does not use the word slavery.
Yes.
But Africans came over to find jobs.
Right.
No, are you serious?
It was good for us. It was the best thing that could ever happen to us. Please.
No, in Texas.
When I was
But still, I'm concerned about book banning. The
Yes.
story you're telling,
Yes.
Well, if you
that's
can't read it
yeah.
anymore.
Kids will not learn.
well, they won't
time when
learn
they
if we don't speak out and say something. When I was growing up, we learned about Crispus Attucks. And he was in about every history book that I ever learned from was Crispus Attucks. Great man, okay, that's great. But there's so much more history. And the good news now is that we are telling our own history. Thank you. We're telling our own history. We're telling it what it was like to be enslaved. And hopefully, and you know, slavery does go on around the world yet. Girls, for instance, being in white slavery. Okay, we could talk about all of those kinds of things that are happening that we as human beings have pushed on people because of the color of their skin. It's amazing. So I don't romanticize it. I tell it like it is. It was horrible when my people couldn't go where they wanted to go on Sunday afternoon without permission of a master. It was horrible that we couldn't own property. It was horrible we couldn't vote for so many years. Women couldn't either. Now, that's another situation, but come on. Let's tell the truth. Let's make sure that it never, ever, ever happens in any way or any form for any people, including those immigrants that want to come here. Why wouldn't you want to be in the greatest country in the world?
Absolutely.
And who should be excluded? Well, I'm not going to get into politics, but anyway. Yes, questions?
I just want to say, like, seeing an object, like seeing that object from so long ago and knowing that, like, his feet wore those shoes, like, it makes it so real.
Yeah.
It helps you to, like you were saying, to not, like, not that I would ever glamorize slavery. I don't understand anybody would ever do that, but it helps you to see, like, imagine it as a real thing that
Yes,
happened.
it happened.
Like, here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just really thank you for bringing those and, like, being
They're
able to do
here.
that.
They're
The
upstairs.
connection that makes for us, like, just.
You know what I like doing? I haven't been able to touch them that much. So whenever they're out of the box,
I know.
I put my hands in them. I think I put
The address that those were found at, is that the 209 down here?
no,
Is it the farm?
no, it's out west of town where my Aunt Ina lived. She and Tony Burden, whom she married, both had family here. And they had their house built out just west of town on Williamsburg Pike.
Okay.
That's where that house is. Great-great-grandmother's house is up here on North Street. It is occupied. It's a private home. They're so kind, though, to leave his name up there. That's where Wimbush lived. And like I said, my home burned on Thanksgiving Eve several years ago after my parents had finally. We all graduated from high school, and my father could move to Richmond. He worked in Richmond most of his life, and he could move there. So, anyway, I hope.
Yes,
She wanted to ask a question.
I'm sorry,
recommend,
yes.
if you don't already watch it, Finding Your Roots on Tuesday evening. And I just love that show. And
It's required at my
I
house.
love that you can trace, a lot of times, the black folks' history by
Yes.
their owner. And
Yes.
I've studied this. It's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Um,
I had a man come into the Kansas City Library from out west of Strawn, and he said, I want to know why people on my road have cemetery markers for sidewalks. And I found out that Peter Winslow came from North Carolina, came to Richmond, bought property out there. His son Daniel was a famous AME preacher. But there was a cemetery in the field, and a farmer decided to plant corn there, and they just
knocked the stones over and kept planting.
It makes me sick.
We had to, several years ago, up in Modoc, where the church was formed there in Henry County, I had to go up there and stop a farmer from, my family, stop a farmer from doing the very same thing. Knock down the stones and do what you want to do. Thankfully, there are laws against that now,
Yes.
that can't happen. There are also, by the way, do you know when black people could marry white people in this state? When it was legal? 1965. Look it up. So, you know, I love my heritage. I am proud to be a black person. I'm very proud of my heritage. And I hope you are of yours. But we need to remember the things that human beings have done to human beings. And we need to be vigilant that it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
I had passed out a document. We are doing as a historic site and as the keepers of the shoe, you know, I see ourselves now as the keeper of William's story. And a year ago, Eileen and I were having lunch, and I said, I think we need to have something written so that when people have questions about William, or, you know, we tell William's story to magazines all the time and such, it'd be nice to have something to hand over. And she agreed it was a great idea. Well, I was really hoping Eileen would write it because it's her family story, right? And she goes, no, Joanna, you're going to write it.
I know it already.
I know, but anyway. But what I wanted to do here, though, was to take that family oral history that Eileen's family has done so well with, and again, try to put it with the sources that we do have. So just real quick, I'll just walk through a little bit of those sources, you know, because in history, with organizations like ourselves, for decades, we disregarded oral history. We didn't think it was important. You know, it's being passed down in not that it wasn't important, it's just, how do you know this is what really happened? How do you know that this story is the same as it was told 3 generations ago? And now it's really becoming something where we're paying better attention to that. So, you know, a lot of what Eileen shows and gives is a very emotional story, right? And how that connects with her family. And a lot of museums can't create that emotion. If I just display those shoes, I can use written record and such. So we're working really hard to collect as much of that emotional side of the story. We did an oral history interview with Eileen earlier this year that we recorded and such, so that as we continue on in the future, if we make some changes with our exhibitions, future programming and such, it's not me always telling the story. We have a way to be able to show that family tie, even in the years in the future when Eileen's not walking the earth anymore, God forbid, we can still bring in that emotional element where the written record, right, doesn't always serve as sort of, does that make sense? Sort of that emotional element. But Eileen talked a lot about the 1850 census, and, you know, for a lot of the work of trying to do William's story and to write this document and to look at written, you know, for a long time I was thinking we might just have the 1850 census. We have that for a lot of the residents who called New Garden Township home in that period of history. We know that they were black, or they may have been a mixed race. We know that a lot of them came from North Carolina, and that might all that we have, this object, the stories Eileen's family has, and these few details. So I don't have to go through that, but when I started looking like, well, how far back can I really find an actual written account of William's story? So I started digging, and I found a reference to an obscure newspaper that was published in Richmond for a short period called the Radical Republican. And the Richmond Radical. And through the resources I had, I couldn't quite find anything online, so I reached out to Sue King at Morrison Reeves Library and said, can you help me? Because I know you're a lot better at this. And I said, can you find this reference? And she did. So it appears that the earliest reference we have written of William's story is as far back as 1869. So, and what's great is reaching far back and looking at some of these, and there's some other newspaper articles as well, is it really does confirm a lot of details that the family had. So that is really written here in this document, which you're welcome to take. We will continue to look at William's story and how we can expand it. William escaped twice. He was born in Person County, North Carolina as a slave, somehow made it into Tennessee. I have a theory how, but not quite ready to share that because I can't prove it, just a theory. But escaped twice, both times out of Memphis, trying to escape out of Memphis. And anyway, so finding articles as far back as 1869, this is when he was alive. William is the one telling this. Right, so we're grateful to have that. So it confirms more of those oral history details. It also puts it in a better. It helps you to conceptualize it. So when she had started saying, well, the family story was that he was shipped to Levi Coffin here in Newport. He was not shipped to Levi Coffin, but he was. Well, they tried to ship him, and in his first escape attempt, it didn't work out well because he was caught. He couldn't stand being in the box. He was sitting in the wharf in the hot July sun, and he just couldn't take it anymore. And he finally said, let me out, basically. So he was arrested, he was caught, and he was sent back to Mississippi because, according to the article, that's where his enslaver was. So his enslaver hired him out, allowed him to live in Memphis, and as long as he sent money back, a certain amount every month, he could continue to work and make money for himself, which is part of the reason why he was able to afford some of the things he was doing to escape, because he was actually making an income for himself. So we're studying those things because if he was found and jailed in Mississippi, there's got to be a record there. I got to get to Tennessee. I got to find, there's got to be a court case. There had to have been a judge. There's, it's hard to find newspaper articles in the 1840s, but it may be something where you got to take a trip and see what you can find more locally. Well, I know it's not, I can't say I can just pick up and do this tomorrow though either. Can that mean we can trace, if we can find some evidence there of perhaps who his enslaver's name in a record, then that also, so it just leads you down, it's a rabbit hole sometimes, and you don't always get to move as fast as you want. So I was really grateful to find this because it helped to confirm a lot of these details. And then some slightly later articles, William Bush is mentioned in Andrew Young's History of Wayne County. So that Andrew Young's the one who said, well, the radical Republican, that's where I saw this. And I was like, what is this? So anyway, it just led me down this rabbit hole. So grateful that we have this, that we can share this with folks that have questions about William's story, and stay tuned. You never know, we might have some answers of some other of these questions of his story and what we can find out. So go ahead, Marlene.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've been up here recently or whatever, and you speak of freedom seekers. And when Eileen just mentioned, why are you romanticizing it or whatever, they were slaves.
Sure. No,
that escaped.
Right.
But to me, you're trying to soften it by saying freedom seekers.
Okay, no.
That's how I feel, but
I thought that too. For a long time, I didn't like that because I thought, well, we're just gonna act like all the slaves were happy to be slaves and it's okay, and they were freedom seekers. We'll call them something else, and then slavery's not a good word. And so I objected to that strongly. But as I've learned more and thought about it more, they really were freedom seekers. They never wanted to be slaves.
If you think about the story we tell here, we're not necessarily telling their story as their slaves. These are individuals that have escaped that situation. They are seeking for that freedom. And that's a phase of, it's also sort of this rejection of considering them fugitives, because historically they would have been seen as fugitives. And so we don't want to set that narrative. So in our mind, right. If I was to talk of William's life in North Carolina or Tennessee, I would refer to him as a slave, because at that time, that is a situation of his life. But if I was to speak of the moment that he was able to get on that riverboat and make his way north towards Cincinnati, he is in that moment of seeking that freedom. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's
okay.
Better, like I said, the first.
Sure. And you're not the first one to make statements or to question that. Okay. And I can understand that. So.
Well, wasn't that considered a crime? Wasn't it considered theft if a slave escaped? It was theft of property.
It would, if you were in Levi Coffin's situation, yes, he would be seen as a thief because he's aiding and abetting.
Well, but even slaves would be seen. I mean, they were considered criminals.
They were fugitives. They were officially considered a fugitive. Right. Yes.
And nothing much has been said about the people that hunted them down.
Sure.
That was a horrible thing.
Right. Correct. So, all right. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate that. Thank you to Eileen for her willingness to give us her afternoon and to share. And